Welcome back to bossing unboxing videos on YouTube. Because of all the weird trends on YouTube, unboxing videos has to be the weirdest. Just kidding, of course it's not that, it's Macbeth, because that's where all the real views are. Macbeth, Kingship and Leadership, a request from Diana who wanted a video on this, so I thought I would do that since I haven't got one on there as it stands. So we're going to look at this through the lens of two possible questions. There's a theme question, and actually the one on the right here should say character. And it's as you can see, I'm a bit rusty. Character and theme question, because sometimes they mix the two. And we're going to look at this. How would you go about answering this? So we'll look at the extract and the question. But the questions are both linked to kingship and leadership, and there's a lot of overlap between the two. I mean, kingship is specifically relevant to the play because it's a play about kings becoming kings and losing your throne and your crown, which happens several times in the play. And leadership is just a quality that's more general, and we might see leadership from other characters aside of a king. Okay, so let's have a look at this extract. So this extract comes from Act 4, Scene 3. So I chose two extracts that I thought could be, so certainly the one on the left is a good contender. If they gave you a question on kingship, that's a really good one, because we have this moment between Malcolm and Macduff discussing what makes a good king. And Malcolm is testing the loyalty of Macduff, who's come down from Scotland. Is he still loyal to the tyrant King Macbeth, or can he be trusted? So we have this kind of loyalty test, but also a discussion to see if Malcolm would be, the qualities of kingship are discussed there. The second one is, I know what's happened there. This is what's annoying about this thing. You have to turn this. So I have to turn this. Seamless. And there you'll see that that's correct now. Look at that. That's what you come here for. You come here for the seamless editing live. Beautiful. This one, a theme and character question, it's still not spelled correctly up there, is it? Well done, me. Is an unlikely extract. I just think it's a bit too weird, this little exchange here between Macbeth and the servant. But one thing it will allow us to do is to talk about what kind of king Macbeth has become by the end. And this question anyway, and they might choose another part of the play where he demonstrates this. Explain how far you think Shakespeare presents Macbeth as a weak leader, and that's what our focus will be when we come to that. Okay, so let's have a look at this extract. So Malcolm begins by outlining the qualities that make a good king, and he uses this phrase, the king becoming graces. This is a nice phrase because he's, all the things that make a king, that become a king, that and grace here is linked to God, because if we use the word grace, there's always an association with God, and we know that there's the divine right of kings. So there's an easy way to bring in some AO3. Divine right of kings and great chain of being, etc. But mainly the divine right of kings and the fact that the king is God chosen. And then we get this asyndetic list of what those graces are. And this long list here, I think there's about 13 words here. These, it's almost like a recipe for what would make the perfect king. And we have all these positive qualities being listed there as nouns. So we get an asyndetic list of nouns listing all the qualities. It's almost like a recipe of what would make the perfect king. And you could zoom in on any of those and explore that if you wanted to. But I think what's more interesting here is the list of those. Now, by inference of listing what makes a good king, we're reminded of all the things that Macbeth isn't doing. Before this, we get reports from what's happening in Scotland, the tyranny that's happening in Scotland. There's a lot of stuff about it weeps, it bleeds, so this personification, bleed, bleed, poor country, great tyranny, a devil more damned than evil, each new mourn, new widows howl, new orphans cry, the tyrant king, tyranny is mentioned a lot. that comes before this list. And of course here we're having a conversation where Malcolm is claiming to be even worse than Macbeth in some ways, to see if Macduff would find that palatable and actually is loyal to Macbeth and that type of tyrant king. But by showing us these positive qualities, it's basically showing us everything that Macbeth isn't. And we've seen just before this, so that's why that's quite important to always think about what comes before. Well, if you know and are able to quote, to zoom out from the extract, that would be a really useful thing to do. Bleed, bleed, poor country, great tyranny, it weeps, it bleeds. Well, this imagery here, new widows howl, new orphans cry, new sorrows strike heaven on her face. So even God, is mortified by what's happening there. So then we get this immediate contrast with, stark contrast with this positive list of all the things that a good king should be. So I think that's what's important there. And then Malcolm continues to say, well, I don't have any of these, because he's testing Macduff here. And at the end he says, nay, had I power, if I were king, I should pour the sweet milk of concord into hell. Uproar the universal peace, confound all unity of earth. Well, the thing that we're interested in here is this phrase, pour the sweet concord, the sweet milk of concord into hell. And the reason we're interested by that is this, the sweet milk of concord, which means, basically that means I would sow chaos even in hell. Uproar, but we're interested in the sweet milk of concord. Why? Because it reminds us again of Macbeth. Remember, Lady Macbeth referred to Macbeth as having the milk of human kindness, and that was a flaw in his character that would stop him taking the throne by Machiavellian means. And why is that interesting? Well, that suggests that he did have these positive qualities, right? He did have some of the king becoming graces. He had this milk of human kindness. And he's lost it because it's been corrupted. Now, we could blame Lady Macbeth for that. We could say that that was his hamartia, his fatal flaw, that he's easily influenced, or that this burning ambition to become king at any cost was always there and she just kind of scratched that itch. You can explore that in several ways, but the fact is, she spotted what she saw as a weakness, but what we might think as actually at the start, when he was that heroic figure, the fighting figure protecting Scotland from invaders and from tyranny within, the treasonous original Thane of Cawdor, he did have some of those king becoming graces. Certainly he had fortitude, didn't he? If we think back to the captain's report in Act 1, Scene 2, etc. Okay. All right. Now, when we see what a bad king can do, as in what Macbeth is doing in Scotland, I'm just going to note that on there. I think we can forget this being a short video. It weeps, it bleeds. You want to have short, memorable quotes, and this is quite a good one because we got two lots of personification there. We've got, the idea of blood and the idea of tears. You get the idea. Okay, so that there would be quotes from earlier in the scene. So we get here something else I would zoom in on if I was doing this would be the use of apostrophe. Now, apostrophe is an emotive outburst. So we get this here. Oh, Scotland, Scotland, oh, nation miserable, oh, my breast, thy ends up here. So these emotive outbursts from Macduff show us what happens when there isn't good kingship in the world, in the realm, or in the country. All is lost because there's a tyrant king there now, and if Malcolm ever did become king, he'd be even worse because Macduff believes what Malcolm is saying. So this kind of emotive outburst shows us how desperate the situation is when we don't have good kingship, their emotive outburst. And then we could go a bit further here, because what we then get is an address to the nation. We get use of direct address and personification as Macduff addresses the nation directly. And that's quite interesting. O nation miserable, with an untitled tyrant bloody sceptred, when shall thou see thy wholesome days again. So you could zoom in on that. I think that's quite interesting. And we end here with a sense of hopelessness. You know, if you were talking about the structure of this, it starts with something really positive and ends in hopelessness here and pessimism. And you could explore that. Yeah, so there's two more things we're going to talk about here. This is a lovely phrase, with an untitled tyrant bloody sceptred. That's basically saying he killed Duncan to become king. We get the use of the word tyrant, which is frequently used, i.e. has broken the great chain of being and usurped the divine right of kings. And this is a lovely little compound adjective, bloody sceptred, and it really links the idea of tyranny and wrongful kingship, because the scepter is a symbol of the crown and the throne, but here it's being kind of the word, with the juxtaposition with tyranny and blood and bloody and even untitled, as in not deserving. He's not really the king, with the use of un as a prefix there. There's lots you can get out of that phrase there. And the last thing I would talk about here is there is a comparison made with Duncan. The royal father was a most sainted king, and we get use of superlative, a most sainted king, and the idea of holiness, and that again reminds us of the divine right of kings, and everything Macbeth is not, because he has not been divinely appointed. So I think that there's if you got that one, there's a lot to go at in terms of language, structure. You could, in terms of form, you could look at some of the short sentences here, and how maybe the pace of the scene changes from measured to more emotive and fraught. And I've also thought that when we think about kingship, and if we were to zoom out as we need to do, how does the play as a whole, you definitely want to go back here, right? I'm also would recommend looking at some of the things I've listed over here for the next extract. Duncan gets fooled again. So when Duncan, he gets fooled twice. He gets fooled by the original Thane of Cawdor, and Macbeth, ironically helps defeat him, and then Macbeth becomes the new Thane of Cawdor, and he fools him again. And we have that wonderful moment of dramatic irony, earlier on in Act 1, Scene 3, where Duncan says, I should have put that there, "There's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. He was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust." That's old Cawdor. Enter Macbeth. Dun dun dun. Oh, worthiest cousin. So Duncan gets fooled again, doesn't he? And if he was a really wise king, he wouldn't have been fooled again. So there's that expression in England: fool me once, shame on you; fool me twice, shame on me. So Duncan is in this category, isn't he? Of he's been fooled twice, and really that means as a king he's not perfect, and there's some errors here. And you might even argue that here, when he says there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face, maybe as a king he should be suspicious of people. He should always, be hedging, doubting, trying to understand and read people better, or at least surround himself with people who can do that if he's no good at it. But in either case, I think that Duncan is a flawed king for these two reasons, and we could explore that. There, like I said, come and have a look at the things I put over here, because these could be useful for an answer anyway. Again, it's possible if you got an answer, a question on kingship, that it might come from that bit where Duncan is getting fooled again in that moment of dramatic irony that you could explore there. All right, the next question is from Act 5. I think it's 5, isn't it? 5.5. As you can see, I'm having an absolute mare here, aren't I? Do you remember that expression, having a mare? It probably doesn't exist in 2023. It used to be a thing back in the day. All right, so this one, what would we say about this one? So this is about a character question. It's about Macbeth, and it's about a theme, which is leadership. So I think here what we're seeing is at the end of the play, when things become slightly more panicky and uncertain for Macbeth, he really starts to lose it, doesn't he? So this starts by him saying, "Bring them no more reports, let them all fly." So this suggests that he would prefer, we get these imperatives, don't we, here? So if you were looking at the language, this would suggest that he prefers ignorance to knowledge, which seems to be a negative for a leader, doesn't it? So a sign of weakness there. He also is putting a lot of faith in witchcraft and evil. Now you could argue, if we bring in our AO3, we've got James the Sixth. Sorry, James the First. I think he's the Sixth of Scotland. James the First of England, who was also a believer in witches and the supernatural, wrote demonology, and you could shoehorn that in there. But he's relying on a lot on prophecies from the witches, and he'd rather do this than take rational evidence, as in what he can see or hear from reports. And he does that again with the Burnham Wood. So he has more faith in witchcraft and evil than he does in kind of rational evidence that he can see from his eyes or get from other people. And we might question that as a kind of weak leadership, although we might have to give some credence to the fact that at the time, Elizabethan, Jacobean superstitions, maybe, and then obviously this is set in the medieval period, maybe this is more forgivable. What's interesting at the end here, and this is a positive, he is steadfast in his views and his personal credo. Personal credo just means like faith or ideas. Oops, look at that. So he's steadfast in his personal credo. "The mind I sway by and the heart I bear shall never sag with doubt nor shake with fear." So, there we get the old warrior code. We start with Macbeth as a warrior and we end with Macbeth as a warrior. And in this respect, maybe as a leader, he projects power in that way. So you could use that. Now, the thing that's most notable in this extract, and like I said, I don't think you'd get this extract, there's lots of insults in it. He talks about the Thanes, and he really means Macduff, who's gone to the south. He talks about the English epicures. Epicures are luxury lovers. It's an insult. And then he insults this poor servant who comes in. "The devil damn thee black." That's a very damning insult. "Thou cream-faced loon." A lot of references to him looking white and scared and shaken. "Goose look," "villain." So the servant comes in to tell him that there are 10,000 soldiers, and Macbeth absolutely loses it. He calls him lily-livered, another reference to cowardice. "Whey-face," another reference to cowardice. So you could explore these metaphors and imagery to do with cowardice, and it tells us a lot about what Macbeth considers strong, and he, as a leader, he can't show fear, and he resents it in other people, this quality. So these accusations of cowardice show how Macbeth believes in fearlessness and the warrior's code, opposite of his warrior code, and that you could link to leadership. But in a way, our question is about a weak leader. The fact that he's insulting a person, giving him an accurate report of the battlefield outside the castle, shows him in a negative light. I think these insults at someone who he later refers to as a boy show him to be weak. And even though he's trying to project fearlessness, he's acting irrationally, and he's being tyrannical here. This is an example of tyranny. The insults, when you insult children and you have all the power in the room, and you punch down like that on people below you in the hierarchy, that's a sign of weakness. So this is a moment of weakness here. All of this because of absolute power is punching down on a helpless servant. And we see that because the boy, we see this hierarchy because the boy remains polite. I'll just change my thing there, hierarchy. We see that with the use of "sir." We get this kind of respectful formal register, and "so please you." So this boy is able to be respectful and use this kind of formal register, even though he's getting dissed big time by your man Macbeth. So there we are. Like I said, I don't think you'd get that extract. What I'm zooming out. I need to zoom out. It tells me to, as a weak leader, as the play as a whole. And this is right. If you want to get mega points, and you do, marks even, use this word, complicates. Use it as a verb. Shakespeare complicates Macbeth as a character, or complicates the idea of Macbeth's leadership. Let's do that. Complicates the idea of Macbeth's leadership in the play, and that means it's not black, it's not white, but it's neither one nor the other, but it's grey, right? And that's what makes it interesting, and that's why we still read it. So if it was black or white, it wouldn't be as nuanced, and it wouldn't have lasted 450 years. Okay, so after this scene, this is 5.5, he becomes quite reflective, and we see a tragic figure. We have to remember that Macbeth is a tragic hero. This is a tragedy. So he starts off heroic, and then gets consumed and corrupted by power, and the lust or thirst for absolute power under the influence of Lady Macbeth. And at the end, there's a tragic figure who's aware of what he's lost, what he won't now have, but seems compelled to keep going in any case. And we as an audience can sense what might have been. So he talks about all the things he won't now have: honour, love, obedience, troops of friends I must not look to have, but in their stead curses, not loud but deep, mouth honour only. So this means people will appear to be respectful like that boy, but actually it's not from the heart. Curses, as we hear Macduff doing to Malcolm, not loud, because they can't be, because they'd put their life at risk if they did with this tyrant, but deep. It's heartfelt how much they hate him. And all the things, the positive things that should come with old age, he won't have. So that's the tragic side of Macbeth that comes just after. Remember, we should always think about what comes just after or just before, kind of contextualize the scene. Also, later in Act 5.5, in Act 5.8, we see the heroic side of this tragic hero. Blow wind, come rack, at least we'll die with harness on our back. That's in 5.5. Lay on, Macduff, and damned be him that first cries, hold enough. I think he also says, I will not yield, as well. That's a nice little phrase. So there we see that Macbeth is true to his initial heroic figure of being, a soldier, a warrior. I will not yield. It's just before that on 5.8. And this recalls the captain's report in 1.2, but all's too weak for brave Macbeth, disdaining fortune with his branded steel. So the tragic hero's circle, he starts and ends, and there's that recognisable quality, even if here it's for the wrong cause. Originally it was to protect Duncan and the nation Scotland from invaders and from treason, but now it's in a kind of corrupted cause. And in contrast, we always have contrast, so you can use contrast, juxtaposition. We have other things that show us how Macbeth's leadership is weak. The ideal king, we've talked about that, and you could refer back to that, the king becoming gracious in that asyndetic list. We have the mourning of Duncan after he died. It was called a most sacrilegious murder, and here it means that, almost it links it to God and the resonance of the divine right of kings. That's something, like as if someone had been slain in the church, because they talk about the temple. So it's the idea of reminding us of the divine right of kings and that God appoints the king. And so it's almost like God has been murdered. Maybe that would be pushing it too far, but sacrilegious means it's a sin against God. The praise of Malcolm. So when he's crowned at the end, Macduff, hail king, for so thou art, hail king of Scotland. So it shows us how easy it is to be loved if we're a good leader, the rightful leader, and we do things the right way. And we also see the generosity of Malcolm. So maybe the mistake that Macbeth made when he became king, instead of becoming suspicious of Banquo and Macduff and acting in a tyrannical way, he could have just been generous. And maybe this is Duncan's flaw too, that he only gave thanes to people and didn't create a new title. So here, Malcolm, my thanes and kinsmen henceforth be earls. So he creates a new title. And maybe that would, if Duncan had done that, maybe that would have sated Macbeth and maybe even Lady Macbeth from this desire to commit regicide and become kings themselves. So this is maybe a smart play from a strong leader to keep his thanes and kinsmen loyal by giving them a new title. Boom, there we are. Hopefully that has made at least one student in the country happy, but I'm sure hopefully it'll have made more of you happy as well. It hasn't come up so far, kingship or leadership, so it is a contender for this year. You know what to do. You know what to do. Like you like, sub you sub, and I'll be back with more Felicity anon. Bye for now.